Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Point After Podcast, episode 15, the first full-on podcast that we've recorded in, God, I don't even know how long. Joined, as always, by my co-host, Matthew, who is not with me on camera. You've got a beautiful picture of him to look at, though. Matthew, how's it going, buddy?
It's going great, brother. It's great to be back. I know we have a lot to talk about. And, it seems like it really has been forever, and it has since we've recorded a video, but I swear it's been about 2 days since the season started, and here we are.
Yeah, that's exactly what it feels like. And we've recorded videos in the preseason, throughout the season stuff. It's just been a while since we've done a full-on podcast covering multiple topics. But I think now's a good time to get back into it. We got a lot of shit to cover. Today we'll be talking about coaching changes, transfer portal, bowl predictions, college football playoff reactions, Heisman, and then a couple 2023 outlooks. So I say we start off with probably some of the biggest news is Deion Sanders going to Colorado. They officially made that official yesterday after the SWAC championship. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think it's a good move for him or Colorado?
Absolutely. I absolutely think it's a good move for him. Reason one is because, Coach Prime said it best. He said, you either elevate or you get replaced. And he's elevating his career. He wants to be a coach. And he wants to be a coach on the biggest stage. And this is the best step to do it.
Yeah.
And I think, he's done great things at Jacksonville State. So.
Yeah.
Or Jackson State, sorry.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing to me, I was more kind of surprised that he went to Colorado. Not surprised that he left Jackson State. I was kind of surprised that Colorado was the place he went to. But when you break it down and when you look at it, I mean, USC's leaving, UCLA's leaving, so really that puts you to where you're going to have to play Utah and Oregon. And as long as you can compete with them, you don't even have to be you don't have to win your division or anything like that. You just have to be top 2 in your conference. And you look at the Pac-12 this year, and it literally came down to two lost teams. USC ended up being 2 lost, but Utah got into the championship as a 2-loss team, so it's not like you even have to go perfect like you do in the SEC or the Big Ten to make it in. You can start once or twice and you're good to go. I think as long as Deion is able to truly cultivate everyone in that program, obviously he's going to have people that he brings with him, but there's also going to be, I'm sure, support staff guys, social media people, things like that that are already in school at Colorado that he's going to kind of inherit, if that makes sense. I think as long as he gets everyone to kind of buy into what he's wanting to do, I think he'll have successful. Now, I don't know if they'll go and compete for a national championship or anything, but I think he'll at least get his foot in the door and make a name for himself to where he can go to a Florida or Florida State or something like that and, take over a job there at some point.
Right. I think, ultimately that's the plan. I wouldn't see him wanting to be an NFL coach. I think the freedoms and liberties a college coach has is something he wants. And, like you were saying, being able to recruit, he can use Boulder as well as being Coach Prime. He can use Boulder, Colorado as a stepping stool as well, because as far as I'm concerned, I think it's a beautiful place. I agree with you. I'm not sure on the championships. I think they'll definitely compete. I think they'll make noise. And the text you sent me earlier are already locked in a 5-star receiver, so things are already on the upside for Colorado as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, another thing is I saw somebody on Twitter earlier was talking about how Jackson State is already losing commits because of Deion leaving. And I was talking about this last night with somebody who mentioned, I wonder where Travis Hunter will go. Well, Travis Hunter's going to Colorado.
Yes.
Unless it's blocked or he's ineligible or some reason for him not to transfer from SWAC to the Pac-12, he's going with Deion. He's not going to be committed to Florida State up until signing day, then flip last second just to leave Deion when he leaves. You know what I mean? These commits that committed to Jackson State did not commit to Jackson State. They committed to Deion and what Deion was doing at Jackson State. And I think he's going to be able to put together a pretty decent recruiting class, but I think he's going to be kind of Lincoln Riley-esque where he makes his name in the transfer portal.
I agree. I definitely agree. And, one thing, too, it's just as much of recruiting, great players and, getting exposure, going to a more prominent school, he's got to be able to build a good coaching staff too if he wants to be there. I would assume he's going to be there 3 to 5 years. That would be my guess, unless things just go south and he doesn't land another job. But I would assume he's just going to want to keep climbing, like you said.
I think even if things do go south, I mean, you got to think like he's still competing in a conference that's not. He's not going to come in and just take over.
Right.
Oregon, Utah, Kyle Whittingham, Dan Lanning, like there's really good coaches in that conference. Another coach we can talk about real quick is Kenny Dillingham. I think I just said him, and I meant to say Kyle Whittingham and then Kenny Dillingham. I got those two names confused, but he's going to be another guy who I think will make a good impact at Arizona State. He's a guy that a lot of people love. He's got a really creative offense. Kind of like Garrett Riley's kind of making a name for himself. Dillingham's a name that's been floating around for a while. I don't think there's any other Pac-12 hires at this time. Stanford, David Shaw retired, or not, I guess retired, quit, whatever you want to call it. So there's going to be a lot of new head coaches in the Pac-12, not just Deion and Kenny.
I agree, and I actually didn't even know until right now that it was confirmed. I knew, Coach Shaw was planning on leaving, but I didn't know that it happened until you said something. I hadn't even really been keeping up with Pac-12 as far as outside the conference championship. That's just kind of been the big bubble for the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, and really there's not a lot of coverage, Pac-12, at least that we see on mainstream ESPN and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Mostly because outside of Oregon, Utah, and USC, nobody's really been relevant. And I think the Pac-12 is about to be where it's similar to the Big 12 this year, where obviously TCU made the playoffs that we'll get to a little bit later, but outside of them, everybody else was kind of on the even playing field. Everybody was 9-3, 8-4, somewhere in there. And I think those teams are, tier 3 caliber teams with a few tier 2. But I think the Pac-12 is about to get to that as well, where you don't have like the 8-4 in the past in Pac-12 is about to be a lot different than 8-4 in the future. Does that make sense?
Right, I agree.
Like I think the quality of teams in the Pac-12 is about to get a lot better compared to the past.
I definitely agree, and two, I think Coach Prom knows if he's wanting to try to make his name in this, he's got to go to. You can't. Personally, I wouldn't just want to jump right into, the SEC or the ACC and try to make a push there. So I think, that's low-key in the back of his mind also. So who knows? We're about to see a lot of transfer portal people, I think, committing to Colorado. A lot of people.
Yeah, I've got the On3 portal live wire pulled up right now, and there's 488 people that have entered in 2022. I don't know exactly how many has entered since the season ended, so like since last weekend. But I know there's currently 488 people that have entered the portal who are like ready to play next season. So that'll be very interesting. I think that number will probably hit over 1,000 easily. But another coaching hire we can talk about heading back to the South would be Hugh Freeze at Auburn. A lot of people predicted it would be Lane Kiffin. I think really that with Lane, if Lane leaves Ole Miss, I think he's going to be, like you said with Deion, where he's looking to upgrade. I don't see going from Ole Miss to Auburn as necessarily a huge upgrade. That could change in the next couple of years while he's at Ole Miss, but I think right now at least that wouldn't be an upgrade for him, which is why he ultimately didn't take it. But Hugh Freeze, questionable past, but I think he's still a pretty good coach with his his background aside, I guess.
Right. And, I've seen cases where, he's tried to recommend his name back on the higher scale of, not being one of those people that's looked at for what he's done wrong. And you certainly respect that, but definitely got to keep that in the back of your mind. But nonetheless, I think it was a great hire. I don't know too much about Carnell Williams, Coach Cadillac, whatever you want to refer to him as, and Hugh Freeze. Like personally, on an Auburn standpoint, it seems 50-50 from a fan base on what they wanted. But personally, I think with Robbie Ashford, I think Hugh Freeze was the best hire because we've seen him develop, and have successful quarterbacks at his time at Ole Miss and other schools. So
Yeah,
that's what I would mostly be excited as for an Auburn fan is quarterback development, which is something they've lacked in years.
yeah, and with all the quarterbacks that are in the portal too, I wouldn't be surprised if Hugh goes out and gets a uh, Jerkowitz or somebody from Boston College. Maybe
Yeah.
I would say Brendan Armstrong, but I think he may start over Robbie. But the point is like, I think he goes out and gets a vet that can come in and either compete and beat out Robbie and be the starting quarterback next year, and teach Robbie a lot of stuff and help develop him mentally so that he can be a good starting quarterback his junior and senior year. Or at least go and grab somebody who can help him in the in the classroom or in the meeting room, and ultimately push Robbie to be a better quarterback. I mean, you had TJ Finley, you had Zach Calzada, but TJ wasn't really impressive. Calzada was hurt all season. I don't even know if he truly was available this season. I think he had surgery midseason as well. So I think that's what Robbie needs is someone there to test him as well, not just for Freeze to develop him. You know what I mean?
Right, I think you're exactly right. Competition would probably do the program and Robbie both some good, and I could very well see Coach Freeze going out and getting somebody in their senior year, maybe even a grad student year, whatever you want to call it. Somebody with plenty of experience that he can kind of get his playbook and stuff established under an experienced quarterback. And not saying Robbie Ashford is experienced; he just got 1 year of experience. I get that, but when this is it's going to be brand new to the team. I'm sure he'll keep some things the same in a sense, but ultimately he's going to implement everything new in his own way. So I definitely could see that happen.
Yeah, and I just pulled up the portal. I mean, you've got Haynes King, who is in from Texas A&M. You've got Connor Bazelak from Indiana, Jerkowitz from Boston College. You got Armstrong from Virginia. You've got, let's see, John Paddock from Ball State. I think he's a name to watch out for with the portal. Malik Hornsby from Arkansas, Paul Tyson. Those aren't guys that are going to come in and necessarily just give Robbie a lot of information to build off of, but I think those are guys that can come in and at least compete with him for a starting job.
Right. And, us quarterbacks aside, I think Hugh Freeze Auburn is, well enough and established enough program that they've always been, one of the top teams in terms of defense. So you can get, the right people in there to keep the defense as it is, especially recruiting. I forgot the guy's name, but I asked one of my Auburn buddies, whoever it is that recruits the D linemen that are always, feeding to the NFL. If you can keep that and build on that, I think you're looking at obviously a better season than the last couple.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're pulling up the coaching changes again. We've got Matt Rule taking over at Nebraska, coming back from the NFL. Another NFL guy, while I'm touching on coaching guys, is I've heard that Joe Brady is looking at coming back to be the offensive coordinator at Oregon. I don't know if you've heard that. I've heard rumors of that, and I mean, where there's smoke, there's got to be a fire somewhere. I think that's another good hire as well.
Yeah, and I actually asked Kate about it. Asked him, and I think Matt Rule is one of the guys who was saying good hire. A lot of look at his history at Carolina. Matt Rule is a really good defensive coach, and I think that's something that Nebraska hasn't first at. But being Nebraska, you're already a big name program. You've got a great brand. You'll be able to recruit better, this and that. So I'm thinking obviously it's going to be better for Nebraska. I personally like the hire, but I think it's one of those, it's not as clear cut to me as Hugh Freeze or Deion to Colorado. I think you're going to have to give Matt Rule some time and maybe a season or two, be a little lenient.
Yeah, I
with the process,
especially with what he's having to rebuild from. Nebraska's a blue blood program, in my opinion, especially in the past, where a lot of people are going to want to go play for Nebraska, despite how good they've been. Let's go and being able to say, hey, I play football at the University of Nebraska kind of carries some weight. So I think Rule has
Right.
that going for him. Another guy I think would be Luke Fickle with Wisconsin. I think he's done very well at Cincinnati. That if there's out there and there's people that are like, well, Wisconsin traditionally has been good defense and run heavy offense. I don't necessarily see Wisconsin sticking with that. But I
Hmm.
still think Wisconsin is in a really good position to go out and compete year in and year out. You retain Jim Leonhard as your defensive coordinator, so you know Wisconsin's still going to have one of the best defenses in the country. As long as
Hmm.
Fickle gets a really good offensive coordinator, and then just is able to continue recruiting as well as he has been. I mean, Cincinnati hasn't done great recruiting, but it's also Cincinnati. They're G5, like they're competing against 60 other Power Five schools. That in reality it's hard to compete against. So I think Luke Fickle's recruiting tactics and stuff at Wisconsin paired with Leonhard should be pretty well. I think Wisconsin could easily win the West, maybe even next season.
Yes, I 100% agree with everything you just said. And the reason is Coach Fickle, it's the same situation as Dion. He's had success where he's at, and Cincinnati's a great program, but right now, he's looking to elevate himself to get to, where he was last year. And people need to understand that Luke Fickle is a great coach.
Yeah.
I don't know if many people realize that, and I love the move. I think he's obviously on the back nine of his career, so he's wanting to. I think he's still got great football sense left, and I definitely see success from Wisconsin. This is probably one of my favorite hires personally. Um, this all or whatever you want to say, coaching off season or all this coach filling spots, whatever you want to say. This is personally one of my favorite just because I think he's going to have success. And like you said, Wisconsin is defense first team. They've usually been ground and pound, but I think we're about to see a mix up. And we're about to probably be looking at a Wisconsin team scoring 28, 32 plus points a game. Mhm. Yes, I think if Wisconsin has that one or two successful seasons in a row, a top 25 recruiting class, you'll be looking at them competing with especially Penn State and, like you said, Minnesota, and very well could have their hands on somebody like Michigan. But I think, Luke Fickle knows that. I think he knows that Ohio State's the top of the throne, Michigan's top of the throne right now, and Wisconsin's one of those teams like you just mentioned about Nebraska. They hold so much in the brand. They're such a rich history program. Um, I just love the move. I wish nothing but success for him. And I think we're going to see a lot of big recruits go to Wisconsin. Especially local people that usually go Michigan or Ohio State, Penn State. I think we'll see Wisconsin be in the mix probably in the next year or two. De- I was just going to say, definitely going to see success. I think we'll see them mix up and probably take the place of Penn State. I'm not sure what Penn State's future holds, but right now, Wisconsin looks to have the most upside. one second. I'm driving through. For the people that are not aware, I'm actually on the road right now, but trying to do a little cautionary. But there's a lot of big names I want to wait and we'll cover in probably a couple minutes or so. But somebody that's really stuck out to me, and I don't know if we actually mentioned this the other day, but I think North Carolina is in Mack Brown. I think that's one of those positions, kind of like Coach Shaw. Either you're going to see Coach Brown either step down or something to that nature soon. But North Carolina has been one of the teams because I really think they're like right on the edge. They're one of those just edge teams, those edge playoff teams. If they can get things figured out. I was going to get your opinion on that on live record. What you thought?
Oh, just Mack Brown, or?
Well, do you think North Carolina would be a place, or are they at a time with Coach Brown that you think either this year or next year that they part ways? More so probably next season.
I could see that. I think North Carolina is definitely in a really good position. I think their goal, and Blake, if you're watching this and can correct me if I'm wrong or guide us or whatever, I think their goal with bringing in Mack Brown was to transition them to the next level as a program, get them to where they're competing for the division and competing for a conference championship every year. Like, I don't think their goal was to bring in a guy that could immediately take them from what they were to making the college football playoffs year in and year out. Like, I think it's a stepping process. And Mack getting them to where they can compete for a division championship and a conference championship year in and year out is where they want to be. And now that, they came up short yesterday, but if they're able to maintain that after next season, I think we could see an opportunity where Mack says, okay, I've got you where you want to be at. I've got you in a good spot. I don't know how old the guy is. He's got to be late 60s, 70s.
Right.
To where, like you said, they're like, okay, the program's in a good position. Now's the time where Mack steps down and we bring in a guy who's that we think can take him a step or take us a step further.
Right, and let it be. I definitely agree that that makes perfect sense. And I'm not saying Coach Brown has done a bad job. Actually, what you said makes perfect sense. Getting them to that 9-3, 10-2, 11-1 spot, which I really thought they were going to have 10-2 on log going forward, but it is what it is. But what I'm looking at is you've got a quarterback who's going to be a top 5 draft pick. Now, I know Mack Brown has done it in the past, but you got to think at some point there's got to be a push to okay, well, this is our shot for now. Do we want to go ahead and grab it, or are we going to settle for that, runner-up ACC typical 9-3, 8-4 season? Because I wholeheartedly believe North Carolina could be a playoff team with the right people in place. And, that's the same for everybody, but North Carolina, I feel like, already has the player pool and the player talent and the recruiting trails straight to North Carolina, Chapel Hill, that give them that championship status. They're no worse than Clemson to me. Clemson has just had like I said, a better past 10 years. But right now, I think North Carolina is just right under Clemson in terms of talent.
Yeah, absolutely. I've even seen, for some reason, rumors of Drake May transfer it. I don't think that's the case. I think, like I said, they're in a really good position. I don't think Drake May is going to go all right, well, 8-4 or whatever they went this year just isn't good enough for me. I'm going to leave, or 9-4. Stay there, build a little bit. You're in a program where you're good enough. You're already getting a national spotlight. If you stay there and have another solid 2 or 3 seasons, look at Will Levis. He's at Kentucky and he's a projected, first round top 10 draft pick in some boards. I feel like that's the kind of guy that Drake could have. If Drake's, I don't want to say in it for himself and not worried about a national championship, but if he's worried about his draft stock and everything, he's at a good place to do that. But like you said, he's also at a good place to where they can go compete for a national championship within his time there.
Right, and I already know, how we feel about Drake May and the Heisman. We'll save that conversation for another video. But nonetheless, I would keep an eye, as college football fans and North Carolina fans, I would keep an eye on that situation. I don't think, Mack Brown should be pushed away. But I think at some point there's got to be like, all right, we got to grip this thing right now and start riding. So that's personal belief, personal opinion, of course.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the portal, I think we've ruled out Drake May entering the portal, but there's been a lot of guys that have already entered it. There's a lot of guys that are declared for it, but unofficially in it. We got Trayshawn Holden. We've got Hank Bachmeier out of Boise State. We talked about a couple other quarterbacks, Armstrong and Haynes King earlier. Is there any – I think James McCarthy's probably the only one big name that has already determined where he's going next. Is there any names that have stood out to you that you were kind of surprised by, at least of those that are officially in the portal?
I was really surprised by Trayshawn Holden. I don't know the full situation there or exactly what the move is. I would think he was receiving good enough playing time, but like I said, it's his own matter and, of course, his own future. So whatever he decides is ultimately, and whatever any player decides is ultimately what you have to respect. So that was one that really shocked me, just being an Alabama fan. I'm not sure. I'm sure we'll hear more about it down the road, but I'm not sure exactly what led to this, is what I'm trying to say. As far as other big names, I think most of them rely at the quarterback position, and we covered most of those. I'm trying to think. I've got, like I said, I've got some notes beside me, and I can't really see and flip through them right now. But is tomorrow the day that everything starts going crazy, or was that actually today?
Yeah, so the portal officially opens tomorrow. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I was about to say, so I know we'll hear on. And this is December 4th, by the way, for anybody listening when we're recording this. So I would expect tomorrow, December 5th, and I would also assume we'll make another video, maybe towards the end of the week or early in the next week to cover more on it. But another one, too, I guess to top it off would be, you may have to help me on the pronunciation, McNamara, Cade.
Cade McNamara, or McNamara.
Yeah. McNamara, yeah. To Iowa, I think that... I understand that. I think he just had, surgery, pretty serious surgery as well. But I think that was one of the ones that stuck out to me, or not really stuck out to me. I saw it coming, but to Iowa was maybe what kind of stuck out to me. I was maybe thinking he would probably go like Pac-12 or maybe even SEC.
Yeah, to me, he was a guy that I think would have been perfect to go with Fickell to Wisconsin. He kind of fits that, what's his name? Backup Falcons now. Desmond Ridder.
Desmond Ridder.
He fits that style player. He fits a Luke Fickell system. Like, he was the starting quarterback the first 3 games of the year at Michigan this year. Now he got beat out by J.J. McCarthy, obviously. But I think that was, I put out that video when he committed, and like you said, it was kind of shocking to go to Iowa of all places. Now, he may have some ties there, something that we haven't necessarily looked into. But he's one that's kind of surprised me. But I also think he's going to be able to make a really immediate impact. And another guy I think that's in the portal is Keviasi Smoke, the running back out of Kentucky. I think he's going to be a guy, same with Jalen Mitchell, the running back out of Louisville. I think both of those guys are going to be able to go and have a true immediate impact wherever they end up. Now, I'm not saying a Jahmyr Gibbs type impact or something like that. And the Zach Evans, the TCU running back that transferred to Ole Miss this year, is that his first name?
Yes.
Yeah. So
yes,
I think,
Evans.
He ultimately was overshadowed by Judkins, but I think Mitchell and Smoke could end up at a ACC school, maybe even SEC or a Big Ten school, and have truly an immediate impact that boost the offense to maybe not the next level, but at least give them a reliable back that they can depend on to be a 3-down guy.
I definitely agree. And another school that kind of just popped into my head was Texas A&M. I know we've already mentioned a couple guys through text or in our group messages from Texas A&M that I've already mentioned entering the portal. I think we'll see more. I'm not sure, and we can kind of tie this into the what we were talking about earlier with the coaching situation. I think Jimbo Fisher is one of those people that should be put on the hot seat next year. You get the number 1 recruiting class. You've got a top 3 recruiting class the last 3-4 years, pretty much your entire time at Texas A&M, and the best you get is won 11-1 or 10-2, whatever it was last year, 5th ranked season. Now, granted, that team should have gotten in the playoffs, maybe, but yeah, I personally expect a lot more from Jimbo Fisher and Texas A&M. So I think we'll see a lot of players as well frustrated and hit the portal probably tomorrow.
Yeah. Tomorrow is when all hell will break loose, like you said. So I'm gonna be sitting around the computer all day for the most part, trying to keep people posted on portal news. So if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button because I'll be covering it the best I can, and Matthew will help me as well. So I think that's about all I got for the portal, at least today. Like you said, I'm sure we'll have a lot of portal news and portal stuff to talk about as the season goes on. But I said we kind of get into the nitty gritty, and we'll move on to the college football playoff reactions. I've got about 30, 40 minutes before I got to get out of here, so that gives us plenty of time. So we have the official playoffs are out. Georgia's 1, Michigan's 2, TCU is 3, Ohio State is 4. We'll start with number 4 and work our way up. Well, I say work our way up. We'll start with 3 and work back because we both know that Georgia and Michigan deserve to be 1 and 2. It really doesn't matter if they're 1 or 2. They're clear-cut top 2 teams in the country. So we'll start with TCU, and I'll let you go first. Thoughts on TCU being number 3 or being in the playoffs in general? If you're still here and I didn't lose you. Muted. Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, sorry, I was in a dead spot. Yes, I wholeheartedly do respect, Michigan and Georgia being 1 and 2. Like I said, it doesn't really matter which ones. Everybody can respect and get behind that. The question, of course, comes in 3 to 4, and everybody knows that. What I don't understand about TCU, and I, if you're just looking at records, like if you didn't see a team name and you saw 12-1 conference champ runner-up, you didn't see a conference or anything, you would assume, yes, this team should be in. And I think they should have gotten in. I think they probably should have been in the 4 seed, and 3 seed, it really doesn't matter. But I think TCU ultimately should have been in the playoff. Whether I think just because of what's outside of 6, you know what I'm saying? So 4, 5, and 6 are literally, I think, just all right there. Not. You have teams with advantages over the other, and other team with advantage over in this area. But man, it's hard. And after I really sat back and looked at it last night and tried to put things together, I think TCU should have been one of the 4 teams. The question to me is the Ohio State and, of course, Alabama. What about your thoughts before we jump into that on TCU?
Yeah, TCU, I pissed off a lot of people Friday night with my take on TCU. And the biggest thing to me, and I was thinking about this earlier as I was preparing for this podcast, is my whole thoughts, and we talked about it as well. Last year, our whole issue with Cincinnati making it was the playoffs are supposed to be the best 4 teams in the country. It doesn't matter what your record is, whatever. The playoffs were designed to be the best 4 teams in the country. So with TCU, I see them as a top 4 team in the country currently. Can you make the argument for Alabama, Ohio State, Tennessee, Clemson to be in the top 4 teams in the country? You can. But my biggest thing with the playoffs in general, and this is all null and void in 2 years anyway, but the way I look at it as if you go 12-0 in a Power 5, that's incredibly difficult to do on its own. It normally happens with 2 teams per year, and the last couple of years it's Alabama or Georgia, or it's Michigan or Ohio State. Really, outside of that, no one else is going undefeated. So I think if you can finish a regular season undefeated, you deserve to be in the playoffs, because I don't think you should be punished for playing a conference championship game. If you go back a couple of years, The Big 12 didn't even have a conference championship game until a few years ago. I think the Pac-12 was the same way. So let's say, for instance, USC, who was number 4 last week, what if they just decided they didn't want to play the conference championship? Well, Utah ultimately gets that win, but then you still have USC, who's number 4. Like, are you going to punish them and take them out because they chose not to play it because they didn't want to risk losing? You know what I mean? Like, they played, they lost, and now they're out. Look at TCU. They played, they lost, and they're still in. Now, obviously, TCU was undefeated and USC wasn't. I just don't think in that scenario, in TCU's scenario, they should be punished for playing a conference championship game against a team they've already lost, or a team they've already played and beat. Now, losing in overtime helped their case a little bit, but that's the beauty of college football. Like, you don't have to go and play a 3 or 5 game series or something like that. You just have to beat a better team on that day. And Saban made the case last night where he was like, would we be favored against the teams that you would put ahead of us? And he's got a point. I think Alabama would be favored probably over everybody except for maybe Georgia and Michigan. I could see that those spreads being really close, maybe a pick'em game, something like that. So he's got the case there, but that's the difference in power ratings versus rankings. Because if you're saying, okay, well, it's the true top 4 teams in the country make the playoffs, no matter their record, then you're saying, well, your ranking or your record is really all for nothing. Because if you're 8-4, but we see you as a top 4 team in the country when it comes to coaching staff and talent and schemes and things like that, and your points per game or whatever, like, sure, you've lost games, but in our eyes, you're one of the top 4 teams, so your record doesn't matter. We're going to put you in. That's where my problem comes in, to where, sure, you can make a case for TCU not being a top 4 team in the country, but at the end of the day, that 12-0 record, 12-1 record, losing the conference championship, has to mean
about
something.
3.
Yeah, it has to mean something.
Yeah, exactly. And if TCU would have lost that game by 20, 25, 30 points, people probably would have been saying different, and I probably would have been saying different, but they didn't. They lost by 3 in a neutral site to a team that is probably pound for pound in the past, for sure, been better. Maybe not necessarily this year, even though they won the game. But TCU lost by 3 and showed good fight. And, and it goes back to the Cincinnati and the Notre Dame. And do I think I think they will play a decent game. The score is going to be 10, 15 points is just my guess, plus. And then that's when everybody's going to, of course, have more to say. But, like, right now, I do agree. You have to – if you go 12-0 in the Power 5, you have to automatically just assume that team gets in regardless of conference championship, which I think is a postseason record anyway. So, technically, they're 0-1 to me. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's how I look at it.
Yeah.
But the thing about the losses is, I think you got to, at a point like that, you look at 2 teams that did not play their conference championship. So I think now you have to look at the loss itself. So you look at the 1 and it's less than 2. So obviously the team that's 11-1 is, quote unquote better, right? But then if you really break down the losses, you have to agree that Ohio State's loss is much worse than Alabama's 2 combined, almost by 4 times the amount of points, and plus being at home in both road games. Now, this is how I see why Ohio State got in. I think everybody plays a bad game every year. At least the best team in the country plays one bad game. We saw Michigan's with, help me out here, the field goal game.
Was it Minnesota? No. Maryland. It was like 2 weeks ago.
Yeah. Anyways, they had one close game, and of course Georgia with Missouri and so forth, and then TCU with Baylor, which Baylor was a good team, but maybe SMU would be the team that you could use as that argument. But nonetheless, Illinois, that's who it was. And Illinois was a pretty decent football team, or still is. But nonetheless, back to Ohio State. Ohio State, I think the reason they got that punch was because that was probably their one bad game, right? If Ohio State wins the national championship, everything would be justified. Them being put in, to me, it would be justified. Now, roster-wise, I think Ohio State, they have the more draft picks, the more bigger names, I guess you would say, the more ESPN-worthy names on their roster. And I think that's one thing you have to take into consideration, bias aside. You have to look at, well, C.J. Stroud is a franchise quarterback. 3 of their receivers are franchise receivers in the NFL. You know what I'm saying? So if you just look at it as that's their one bad game, I can understand it. But if you're going to look at it as their one bad game, you still have to count the other losses into effect. And that's just where the big question mark lies. So I'm trying to find my way to respect the decision and figure out the positives for every team that got in and why they got in. So I'll let you tell me a little bit, and let me backtrack real quick. I'm sorry. I do think Alabama is one of the 4 best teams in the nation, but at the end of the day, you have to you really do have to just look at records and games as individuals, like 0-0 each week, 0-0 each week, as what. And I get that that's hard to do, on a full season, but you have to look at it that way. Conference championships, prime example.
Yeah. So here's the way I took it as to why Ohio State got in over Alabama. I think Alabama could have been the first 10-2 team to make the playoff. And I'll even throw Tennessee in on this for a little bit, because I don't think a lot of people make sense as to, like, a lot of people are, the committee values head-to-head. Well, no, they don't, because Alabama was above them. Well, I'll get to that after Ohio State. I think Ohio State got in over Alabama. The 22-point loss at home hurts, and like you said, that was their one bad game. That's fine. Like, you're going to have a bad game. Like I said earlier with TCU, it's incredibly difficult to go perfect. And the fact that Michigan did it and Ohio State didn't by one game, even if you flip it, say Ohio State, just completely flip it on its head. If Michigan lost by 22 at home, well, they lost to the number 2 team, arguably the number 1 team in the country. So is that loss really that bad? You know what I mean? So,
exactly.
So look at Alabama. They lost to – I'm trying to find the rankings that came out today. So they lost to number 7 or 6 Tennessee, who's right behind them on the essentially the last second field goal. And then they lost to LSU, who's number 17, who was, 13 or 14 before they played Georgia.
Yeah.
So the problem for Alabama, that, in my opinion, why they didn't get in the playoff, their best win is on the road at Texas, who's 8-4. Now, sure, they lost their starting quarterback. You beat Texas by 1 without their starting quarterback. TCU beat them by 7 with their starting quarterback. So I think that's the head-to-head that the committee was able to look at and be like, okay, well, TCU beat Texas by 7, Alabama beat Texas by 1. That's the key. I think Alabama lacked quality wins. I think if they would have beat Tennessee or LSU and lost to, we'll say they lost to Texas, but if they could have beat LSU or Tennessee, I think they could have justified putting them over Ohio State at 10-2, because they would have a win over number 6 or a win over the SEC West, ultimately the SEC West champion. But you get what I'm saying? Like, they would have a more quality win on their resume, and I think that's where Alabama lacked. You had 2 last-second road losses. That's respectable. But versus Ohio State's 1 loss against a team that's ranked essentially directly above them, it's hard to put Alabama in over that. And now that I've covered that, going down the line to Tennessee at 10-2, that's letting South Carolina, who is I think they're 8-4 as well, after that win over Clemson, hang 63 on your head is, like, that's killer. And you can say, Hendon Hooker got hurt that game. Hendon Hooker got hurt in the 4th quarter the game was over at that point.
Yeah, they're already down 3 scores.
Yeah, exactly. So that Hendon Hooker injury did not impact that game at all. So that to me is why Tennessee didn't get put over Alabama. The committee said they value head-to-head, but they also value games the other 11 games that you play. So Tennessee,
Right.
your second loss, like sure you lost to the number one team in the country, but Georgia dominated you in every aspect of the game. They dominated that, and if it didn't start raining, Georgia probably would have hung 40 or 50 on you. So then your next loss is against South Carolina, who's number 19, 8-4. Again, same as Alabama. Like your Alabama's best win is against the 8-4 team. Well, Tennessee, your second loss is against the 8-4 team. Like that's not.
Right.
They're not going to look at that and go, oh, well, you got smacked by Tennessee or you got smacked by South Carolina. I guess you're still better than Alabama despite them getting beat twice last-second plays on truly 50-50 plays that if that kick goes wide left or that pass falls incomplete, like Alabama's 12-0 right now. So like with Tennessee, there was no bounce the ball play that Tennessee could have had go their way to beat South Carolina, and I think that's the biggest difference as to why Tennessee is not ranked ahead of Alabama.
I agree, and another thing too is like you just said, Ohio State's loss was to the number 2 team in the country, and yes, it was at home by 3 scores. But you have to really sit back and ask yourself, because I've watched every snap of every Alabama football game this year. Would Alabama beat Georgia at home? It would be a better game than 3 scores, yes. But I don't think that they would beat Georgia, period. Especially during the regular season if they would have played, the Saturday after Thanksgiving. I think Georgia would have won that game. Might have been by 3, might have been by 2, might have been by 15. But, I definitely think Alabama would play Michigan and Georgia a better game. If they made the playoffs, who they would have got paired with. But at the end of the day, LSU won in overtime, and pretty much, if you watch the game, they pretty much won the whole game. And I know, obviously, they won the whole game. They've won, period. But they won, up front. They won passing defense. They won rushing defense. All the accolades that come with it. And so, at the end of the day, you have to just respect, or maybe you don't have to respect, but you've got to just accept that it is what it is, and so try to bring the positives out of it. Because if Alabama was 11-0 coming into rivalry weekend, and let's say they play Georgia instead of Auburn, and Georgia was the number 2 team or number 3 team in the country, sitting at 11-0. And a bunch of question marks there, right? But let's say Georgia comes to town and wins that game. Well, would you not make the argument that Alabama should be in the playoff if that was their position? Even if Ohio State was 10-2 and we thought that they were a better team? No, Alabama fans would say, obviously, Alabama would be in at 11-1, even though they got beat by the number 1 team in the country, or number 2. So I think at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself that bias aside. If Alabama was Ohio State and Ohio State was Alabama, how would it go down? How would you want it to go down? So
yeah, I think that's probably the most perfect way that anyone could put it to help you understand. And I think I'll close on this to finish up this portion of it. The biggest thing to me with these games is, like you said, like obviously if Alabama got in, we'll say it was Alabama, Ohio State, Georgia, and Michigan, the 4 in the playoff. Screw the seeding; those are the 4 teams that are in. I think the biggest thing with those 4 teams and why the TCU-Michigan game may not be as close as – like I think TCU and Michigan are not even teams, but I think the gap isn't as big as people think it is. But I think the scoreboard after that game finishes may falsely give the impression that the gap is that big. I don't think it is, because I think Georgia, Michigan, and Ohio State – they've been there before. They know how to get up for a big game. TCU had to get up for the Big 12 championship, and they lost. Getting up for the college football playoff is a completely different beast. And I think that was the difference between Alabama and Cincinnati last year, was Alabama's been there before. Alabama knows what it takes to literally year in and year out compete for a national championship. Cincinnati, that was the first time they had to do it. Michigan had to do it last year. They were in the playoffs last year. Ohio State wasn't in the playoffs last year. But they still know what it takes to get up for a national championship. That coaching staff knows what it takes. Like the program is aware of what you have to do when it comes to the playoffs and the national championship, whatever. I think that's going to be the difference maker in the Michigan TCU game is Sonny Dykes and TCU and that coaching staff and Max Duggan and Keandre Miller. They're going to be new to it, and I don't think they're going to be shell-shocked and it's, moments too big, piss down their leg type of thing. I think it just takes so much preparation and knowing how to prep, and you're not going to where you're playing Saturday to Saturday. Like, you're off until, the 31st? So you're off for the next 27 days. You've got finals. You've got Christmas break. You've got all that stuff, not distractions, but just extra things that you don't have to worry about going Saturday to Saturday that you have to worry about now. I think that's the difference maker is why Michigan will ultimately – they'll beat TCU, but I think the scoreboard is going to be a lot worse than what the gap between the two teams truly is.
Right. And, if anybody wants to get mad about anything, they should get mad that in 2014 or 2013 they chose it to be a 14 playoff, because every year you're going to have one team that's clear-cut number one, and if not, you're going to have a number two team that's just right there with them. And in some cases, you have three teams. But for the most part, rankings 3 to 8 are all the same, in a sense. There might be one or two teams better than the other, but record-wise and arguments for being in the playoff or being in the conversation, they're all going to be the same and the same outlook. So, I think that's ultimately what sucks about this situation is there's only 4 teams that get in when there's, probably 7, 8 teams that I think would make the case for a great playoff run. But at the end of the day, we're jumping from 4 to 12 and just overlooking 8 and 10 like they're not even there. So who knows, brother?
Yeah, I think that's perfect, and I've got the rankings pulled up. I'm going to use that as an example before we talk about Heisman and close this thing out. If you look at the top 9 teams in the final rankings, you've got SEC champ, Big Ten champ, Big 12 runner-up, Ohio State, Alabama, Tennessee, who did not compete, and then you have ACC champ, Pac-12 champ, Big 12 champ. That's 1 through 9. So let's say we go to 8 teams. At most, you're still making the case for that 8th spot being between a conference champ and a non-conference champ, or a team that didn't compete for conference champ. Whereas if we go to the 12th team this year, you're basically looking at Penn State, Washington, Florida State, Oregon, Tulane. Like, you've got 11 through 16 in the rankings are all making the case for those last 2 spots. Where I think if it's an 8 team, you go to 8 team, it's a lot more clear cut. Like, hey, Tennessee, if you go Power 5 as the top 4 seeds or top 5 seeds and then 3 at large or whatever, just however you want to do it, I don't think anybody would be upset if you throw Tennessee out because Hendon Hooker's out and that bad loss to South Carolina. Like, everyone would justify putting Kansas State or Utah in over Tennessee at this point in the season. Now, if Hendon Hooker's healthy, it's a different story. But when the playoffs were made, if it was an 18 playoff and we had the 5 champs and then we were deciding between TCU, Ohio State, Alabama, and Tennessee for those last 3, I don't think anybody would be upset with the final 8 that's made where, like you said, today you've basically got to argue Ohio State, Alabama, Tennessee, and Clemson, who are all essentially even for that final spot.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So, 12 is going to be a shell shock. It's going to be something to definitely adapt to, for something as avid fans, we've been accustomed to over the last few years. But I think it's going to solve a lot of issues. And every now and then you're going to have that, Oregon team that comes in there and beats number 2 Michigan at home and advances, and then gets absolutely slaughtered by, Ohio State in the second round. Just something like that. But at the same time, like, it goes back to what you were saying. You just got to be the best team on that day. So if you can get to that point throughout the season where you're 10-2, 11-1, 12-0, or 12-1 conference loser, whatever, 13-0, if you can get to that point in the season, that's why you should make the case for making the playoff, because at that point you just got to be the best team on that day.
Yep, absolutely. Well, last thing before we wrap this thing up, Heisman prediction. I'm going to ask you, who do you think will win? Don't necessarily have to give an explanation why. I'm going to give a short one because I think it's not necessarily rigged, but it's not voted on the way it should be. And then who you deserving Heisman Trophy is.
So, man, this is tough because, we really haven't seen a Heisman race. And it's not that they're all, like, just great, and there is a lot of great talent there. Don't miss that point. But like, there's not like a clear cut, Derrick Henry or Tim Tebow, something like that. It's really up in the air to me, and I've thought about it all day long, and I don't know why. But if I had to choose right now, I would probably still go with Caleb Williams. Reason being because he transferred schools, new head coach, and in the first season they make the conference championship and puts USC back on the map, I think, for good. I think USC is always going to be a 9-win team under Lincoln Riley at least. So I think Caleb Williams I think Caleb Williams is going to be the one to win it. Who do I think is the most deserving? Obviously, I'm going with my Tar Heel, Drake May. And the reason is because the dude's a freshman, and if you take him off of that team, North Carolina wins 4 games this year. Maybe 5. That's just personal opinion.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I'm with you, and I think Caleb Williams ultimately is going to be the winner. I think he's going to be the winner. I mean, obviously he's good as hell. He deserves it. There's no doubt in my mind of that. I just think that he's going to win it because, I mean, let's be honest. Let's look at who votes for the Heisman. Half of them are not watching Max Duggan and TCU play on Saturday. Half of them are not watching Drake May play Virginia. You know what I mean? Like, they're not watching football.
Yeah.
They're looking at box scores. They're looking at stat lines. And they're going, okay, they'll vote. And then they'll watch championship weekend or rivalry weekend. And then they'll go, okay, Caleb Williams, dog. And then vote for him to win the Heisman. And I think that's the problem. In my opinion, I'm going to go different than you. You said Drake May. Again, I think he's my number 3. I think my number 1 is Max Duggan. Dude wasn't even the starting quarterback out of camp. I don't think a lot of people realize that. Like, I saw some whack job yesterday tweeted, friendly reminder, TCU lost to a backup quarterback today. Well, TCU's been playing with their backup quarterback all season, and look at them. So,
yep.
I mean, Max Duggan showed yesterday, like, he's got that dog in him. I mean, that was a gutsy performance. Like Lincoln Riley said, Caleb Williams had a gutsy performance, and it was, but Max Duggan truly put the team on his back yesterday, gave them everything he could. They came up short in overtime. I think it was play calling. Run a QB sneak, let him throw the ball or reach the ball over the plane, and you win the game. Like, it's that simple. I think they lost to the play calling, but in no way, shape, form, or fashion did they lose because of Max Duggan.
Yeah, and that's another reason why they should have made the playoffs. Ultimately, at the end of the day, but it did cross my mind. But you look at somebody like Max Duggan too. He kind of reminds me. He's got that old school Russell Wilson vibe, and he's got that maybe new modern school, like maybe not necessarily on a talent level, but in terms of the quarterback style and just play, he reminds me of Jalen Hurts. He's always going to lower his shoulder or, fight or whatever it is. He's not going to give up. And that clearly showed yesterday. And I saw a lot of people saying some pretty disturbing stuff, about his post-game interview. I would love to have a quarterback to shed some tears after a conference championship loss. But nonetheless, I definitely respect that. And I would not even argue against that if he were to win the Heisman.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Caleb Williams, just his name carries too big of a brand for anyone else to win it over him. But we do have the Made for Heisman T-shirts now that we're going to be selling throughout the next 2 or 3 years, so that'll be cool.
Yep.
So, if you're a North Carolina fan, let me know and I'll get you that design. But Matthew, I got to dip out of here.
Or if you're a football fan.
Yeah, absolutely. I got to dip out of here in 10 minutes, so I want to try to get this thing edited and uploaded before that and get it out tonight.
Yeah.
So, any final remarks before we close this thing out? We're about to hit an hour, so.
Yeah, I was about to say we will. I hope if you've stayed through and listened to everything, we'll catch back up later in the week once we hear more transfer portal news and all that. But just stay tuned, stay connected on Twitter if you don't have time to listen, so you can get the tweets. And other than that, brother, it's good to be back. Looking forward to it. I know we got a lot of off-season stuff to cover, and then of course the actual playoff coverage and previews. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully, we can get back on a regular schedule here with
Mhm.
obviously the breaking news videos coming out as well. So, if you've enjoyed the video, be sure to hit the thumbs up button and subscribe. We're on the road to 350. We were at like 65, I think, when the season started. So we've almost gained 300 since then. So, if you're new to the channel, thank you. Be sure to hit that subscribe button. But like Matthew said, it's been a pleasure, and we'll catch you guys, and hopefully, tomorrow or sooner.
Sounds good.